You in 1 minute on the next
Okay.
tape with the proclamations.
Okay.
August 1st, 1995. Survivor, David Stein. Interviewer, Sharon Steinberg-Pearlman. I think you wanted to make one correction about the spelling of your mother's
Right.
name.
The spelling of Zweig is Z-W-E-I-G. I think I spelled it the reverse I-E-G, but it really is E-I-G.
Okay. You were telling me about the proclamations.
Okay. These proclamations came with regularity, and among the proclamations that I remember, because they had direct effect, was that that Jews had to wear stars. And by the way, all of this thing happened under the Hungarians. We really never saw any German soldiers. The German soldiers came through in 1940, came through the town, and they had some Hungarian detachments and some Romanian detachments. As a matter of fact, the Hungarian detachments that came through were pulling their cannon with equestrian soldiers. So they were really not comparable to the German panzers that came through our town. But thereafter, we no longer saw Germans. So all of the proclamations and the enforcement of them were done by the Hungarians.
What years are we talking about
We're
now?
talking about 1940, late 1940, and going on forward until we were deported. So the proclamation came. The one that changed us greatly was the wearing of the Jewish star, a yellow star. That the star had to be of a certain color, yellow, and you had to obtain the cloth at the police station so that it would be uniform. It had to be sewn onto the clothing, and it immediately set us aside from the rest of society, although we were aside from them. Another proclamation was that no longer could Jews no longer could assemble in the synagogues, and that caused great distress. And I remember them discussing it, that the Torahs were thrown out of the synagogues, and the prayer books, although everyone had their own prayer books, so we didn't care too much about that. But I remember them discussing it, that the books had to be buried properly.
Who's the them?
The adults. We used to gather in my grandmother's main room where the oven was located. So they were discussing how they were going to go about, and there were some people with influence who would then discuss it with the gendarmes, the Hungarian gendarmes. The police were local people, but the gendarmes, the finance ministers, were all of Hungarian descent, were Hungarians and acting on behalf of Hungary. So that was a big problem that we had.
If the Jews couldn't congregate, what did you do about Jewish holidays? Did you have services?
Well, we did not have services. They were really not permitted. So we no longer had services, but we didn't have the men in town in any case. And we had a ritual bath, which was still operating, and we went to the ritual bath, and some prayers were said in the ritual bath, but we no longer went to the synagogue. It had been gutted. There was other proclamations in 1942. That's 2 years before we were deported. There was a proclamation that said that Jews no longer could own a business without having a Hungarian partner. And Hungarian was spelled out somebody who was born in Hungary proper. Could not be a Hungarian who had lived in town of Rakov, but it had to be a Hungarian. And I remember that some people, including my aunt, Louisa Laya, who had to really import a Hungarian partner because the alternative was to close down the business. And it didn't really become clear the reason for that proclamation, but the Jews were really merchants, and the flour and the sugar and the oil and the naphtha for the oil lamps, they all were in the stores. So if they were to remove all the Jews all of a sudden, the economy could not continue. But nobody imagined that they would be so diabolical that we prepared our own sort of obsolescence by taking Hungarian partners into the businesses, even shoemaking, the shoe repair, the tailor shop, the tinsmiths, all had Hungarian partners. So when the time came for expelling, well, not expelling, they deported us. They did expel Jews in 1942. A proclamation came, and this really was horrendous. They said that anybody who could not prove his lineage to Hungary or Austria would be deported to Poland. More than half the population was then expelled. The term was used was to expel the Jews. They were foreigners, they were from Poland. Not a single person who was expelled to Poland survived. I know of no one who survived that expulsion. And that thing was announced and by proclamation.
How did they make you prove your lineage?
Oh, there was another thing. My father had come back from the work camps. He had contacted a disease, and he really looked emaciated. He was very sick. I remember that time when he came. And you had to prove, you had to get papers. And people were scurrying around, and you were able to buy false papers to prove that you were of Hungarian origin or Austrian origin.
Did you buy them from Jewish people or non-Jewish people?
Non-Jewish people, because the Jewish people had no, the men were not around. And the way it worked was that the poorer people who didn't have the money, they were all expelled. They were sent to Poland, and that basically was more than half the population of Kraków. Many things just jump in my mind, and I go through it because this was very turbulent times.
Did you know what was going on outside?
No.
In other countries?
No, we did not know what was going on outside. Radios were forbidden. The Jews, that was another proclamation, the Jews had to turn in the radios.
Did they come and check your homes?
Well, you didn't have to come and check it, because if they found a radio, you were dead meat, basically. So when the proclamation came that the Jews had to turn in their radios, all the Jews turned in the radios. So we really had no outside contact.
What about newspapers?
No, there were no newspapers that I can remember that were printed at that particular time. From time to time, we had the men who were truck drivers, and among them was an uncle of mine, my mother's brother, Benjamin, who now lives in Israel, who was a truck driver, and he was considered a highly skilled worker. So he was shuttling back and forth between the Hungary and the front lines in Poland. And he came back and told us what he had seen, that the Jews from the region were in an open field. But he reassured us that surely they're not going to leave them there, that that's what he saw. And we really were not able to piece it together, or as far as I'm concerned, nobody expressed any opinion that they were going to kill him. So it caused great consternation, but we were sure that these people were going to be settled in Poland. And we actually believed that these people didn't belong here, and they were expelled to where they rightfully belonged in Poland.
No one ever heard actually what happened.
No,
No, no word
nobody
ever got
ever
back.
ever knows what happened. There is not a single survivor of the entire expulsion. And things of that nature kept. There was a proclamation that Jews could not work with furs. The native population were trappers. There was sables and minks and stone martens and bone martens, and my father dealt in that too, because he worked with fur. So in addition to making those vests, ceremonial vests, he also traded in raw furs, where the trappers would come down. One of the proclamation prohibited Jews from trading in fur, and it was just one thing after another. It really never ceased. All of these proclamation and the food shortages started to develop, and the population became hostile, because when you become defenseless, they pick on you.
The Jewish population you're talking about.
The native population became hostile to the Jewish population. And there was an incident that I really must tell you about. This had to do that the mayor of the town, whose daughter was getting married, desired to have a vest, this ceremonial vest for the wedding, made by my father. And he assured them that no harm will befall him, because he's making the vest for him. And from what I understand, I spoke to my mother about it, that there was understanding that he was going to get paid for that, because it takes many, many months of work.
He was back from the military?
He came back, he got sick. He got some kind of a stomach sickness. He was so emaciated, it was scary. And so he worked nights doing that vest. And when the vest was finished, the mayor came to collect the vest. And my father had mentioned that he liked to get paid. And he was very indignant. The mayor expressed his indignity in such a violent manner that even if I told it to you, you wouldn't believe that he would do that, because his daughter was getting married.
Can you tell us about it?
Well, he called them all kinds of names, specifically referring to his religion, and he told them that the only reason he's alive because he's protecting him, that he is working in fur, and he should be shot for the treason. And he stormed out with the vest. A few weeks later, the Hungarian gendarmes, the finance ministry, came to search the house, and they basically tore apart the house looking for furs that he was working. They accused him of working on furs, but we had a double ceiling due to the cold weather, and my father had stored the furs in that double ceiling. So the only way that they knew where to look for it, that somebody had to have told them. There's no other way, no other reason that they would know about such a small, narrow space where he kept his lambskins. And as a result of that, he was fined very heavily. We were confiscated, and he was physically abused in the police station. But I thought that particular story will give you more of a feeling how much advantage the local population took with the defenseless Jews.
Did you witness all this? You saw all this
I
happen
witnessed
to your
that.
father?
I absolutely witnessed that.
And how old were you?
I was about 12 and a half.
What did you think at the time about that?
You cannot describe the feeling, because your father is the omnipotent one, the wisest of the wise, and when he tells you something, you just feel it's so. And I remember before the proclamation of Jews being forbidden to work with skins, that he would get up at the crack of dawn, and we would go to the brook because the skins, the way the skins were cured, they were pickled in salt, and then they had to be washed in the brook. And I remember how hard he worked and how cold it was. And then it ended up with the mayor turning him over to the police for making him a vest for his daughter. Then I'm going to skip over because there's just too many things there. There came a time for my bar mitzvah, which falls on the 15th day of Shvat, the Jewish month of Shvat. And remember, we went to the ritual slaughter at Shoichet, and we gathered in this house very early in the morning, and it was dark. And I remember from time to time, the adults would peek out to see if they could see the morning light. And then they proclaimed that there was morning light, and they put a talus on me. Then we davened Shachris. Everybody, my father brought along some whiskey, and they had some whiskey, and that was my bar mitzvah. Doesn't get me upset that I didn't have a bar mitzvah, it just gets me upset at the conditions. I gotta take a rest. The conditions under which he had to be a father, he really couldn't talk to me. I know I couldn't talk to my 13-year-old children about world politics, anti-Semitism, hatred. It's just not, you just can't talk to children of that nature. So it must have been very difficult for him. And right after after Purim, we baked matzahs, and we had a bakery which converted into a matzah bakery, and everybody had a basket which they bought. Either they bought a full basket, depending on the size of the family. They had small baskets. We had a huge basket with a lid on it, and we brought it home. We put it in the attic so they wouldn't come in contact with bread. And the day after Pesach was a proclamation that all Jews have to get ready for resettlement, and we were allowed to take one suitcase per person, and we had to gather in the local school, which was a two-story building. It was a big yard. And
did they tell you where you would be going?
no. That was an order, and we really had to obey the order. And basically, I have a problem with the rabbis, because they were the leaders. The rabbis made all the decisions, whether something was kosher, and when it would be the holiday, when the holiday is over, and which student was good. So they were all wise and knowing. And yet, we followed all of these directives. Nobody put up any resistance. Zero resistance was put up.
Were there any young boys like yourself who wanted to?
Well, young boys at my age really don't understand resistance. But I served in the American Army here, and I can tell you, looking back, in hindsight is 2020, that Rachov, the main road of Rachov, was the main highway that traveled through the Carpathian, from Romania through the Carpathian region all the way into Poland. And it was constantly used by military transport. The bridge was wooden. You could very easily burn down that bridge. The poles that carried the electricity and the telephones, they were very easily sabotaged. The tracks could be pulled. I mean, I can just tell you what could be done. We had no leadership. We really didn't. And I cannot come to terms with it. I still question it to this day. So they told everybody to gather in the school for repatriation. And we were in this schoolyard, and I was standing looking through the gate was an iron gate, and like a picket fence made out of iron. And I saw somebody running with a painting which hung in our living room. And I said, look, that man has our painting. And my father said, well, it doesn't really matter because we can get other paintings. And I saw somebody running with the basket that we kept the matzahs in. We still had some matzahs. And the guards around the schoolyard were the same children that went to school with me. They were the Levante, the youth movement of the Hungarians. And they were stationed around the perimeter of schools, making sure that the Jews went in and were not allowed to, what do you call it? The only Jews that were allowed to leave was those that volunteered to bring food, because their houses were empty. Somebody said they had a bag of beans, somebody had rice, somebody had peas, and so they were permitted to go and bring the food stuff. Basically, we had to feed ourselves in the schoolyard with an open fire. We were cooking.
How long did you stay in the school?
We stayed in the schoolyard for about 3 or 4 weeks. These tracks were very busy, you know, and I'm talking about now of April 1944. The tracks were very busy with military transport, and so they kept us in the schoolyard. And then one morning they told us to pick up our belongings, and we were marched to the railroad station.
Were the men with you at the time?
The men were, well, most of the men were in work camp. It was only the older men and men like my father who was sick, and he had a deferment for further work camp.
It was older men, women, and children.
Right, it was the older man and the women and children. And we went to the railroad station. And
how far was the railroad station?
Oh, that town wasn't that big. The railroad station was probably maybe 1,000 yards away. So we marched there, and then the person in charge of the transport walked up and down, and he decided that there was too much luggage. So only one piece of luggage per family was permitted. All the luggage that we took to the schoolyard was left at the station. And that too was designed, because all of the things that they took was already at the railroad station. They didn't have to use help to steal it, but that's what it was. You didn't realize it at the time, but that's what it was. I remember there was a big rush to open suitcases to find the warm jackets or the better shoes that had been packed away so that we can wear them. And we were put in, we were made to sit down in the wagons, spread eagle, you know, the legs spread apart, one into the other until you reach the door on both sides. And there was a bucket for sanitary use.
How many people, when you say a wagon, what kind of wagon?
It's a railroad car, a freight car, you know, with sliding doors.
Mm-hmm.
And
how many people were in them?
I imagine it had to be 75, 80. It was just crowded.
But your whole family was still together at this time?
We were together in the wagon, but we had lost, the families were sort of, the Aunt Louisa, and I always refer to Aunt Louisa because she was the matriarch. She really ran that family. She was a wonderful lady. She ultimately went to Israel, and she died recently. We lost Louisa in the family. She gave us great stability, and she could comfort you very easily. So we were separated from Louisa, and my grandmother Gittel. I never saw her again.
Do you know where they went? Where Grandma
Yes,
Gittel
we
went?
all went. The transport took that night. It was late afternoon when the train pulled out, and it arrived the next afternoon. We went all night and all day. We went to a place, a ghetto called Mate Solka,
Can you spell
which
that, please?
was, I think it's spelled Matesolka, Mate Solka. It was on the border of Hungary and Romania. It was in the wine country. And they made us get out. And that was the first time that we encountered Germans, was the Marty Solko. By the way we were in Rachov, some people wonder how did we survive all these years in Rachov, because Jews were just expelled and killed. But in fact, it was a ghetto, because we could not travel. We could not engage in any commerce we wanted. We could not engage in services. We could not engage in being families. We were suppressed. The word suppress is too mild for the way they kept us in Rachov. So what was their hurry? We were feeding ourselves. Whenever they had enough room in these concentration camps, they would take us to Marty Solko. From Marty Solko, the Germans would take over and take them to Auschwitz. Everybody went to Birkenau, Auschwitz for Marty Solko.
Well, how long were you in Marty Solko?
We were there 6 weeks.
What kind of accommodations did you have?
Well, when we disembarked, we went to a cemetery, and we camped out in the cemetery. And I spoke to my mother about it this morning because I had remembered. And it was a Jewish cemetery. And she said, yes, she said, I thought they were going to kill us right there on the spot in the cemetery. Why else would they take us to the cemetery? But I had a lot of open spaces. So then they assigned, in the area, there were all empty houses. And I said, well, where are the people from the houses? And my mother said, well, Jews lived here, and those Jews are no longer here, so we are going to live here.
Did you think your mother knew where the Jews were?
No.
She didn't
I never questioned that. I just couldn't imagine that anybody would take families and kill them. And I know it's hard to believe. I just didn't connect.
Did your mother know at the time what was happening?
No. She did not know.
None of the adults?
No, absolutely did not know. And we were then put in these places and in the houses. And we were there about 6 weeks.
How did you feed yourselves there?
They had once a day they had a kitchen, and they went block by block, had to go to the kitchen where they gave you soup lunchtime, and then they gave you bread for next morning. So they told you can't eat the bread, you had to wait till next morning. So we had bread in the morning and coffee, and then we had the soup for lunch. And that's basically how they fed us.
And you had to go and get the food?
Yes, yes.
And come back to the house and eat it?
Right, exactly right, Joe. And I remember some people had utensils that they brought along with them, pots, that they kept in the suitcase. And then soon after that, they began to ship us out to resettle. It's always resettle. They put us into cattle cars again, totally still family together.
You walked from the from the homes to the...
We went to the railroad station, again, just like Arakov. Forced us into these wagons, and this time there were German guards. So it was, the doors didn't close completely. The hinge left a space so they could always look in to see what was happening inside. And it was a much longer ride from Marty Solko to Birkenau.
This is about when? This is in the...
This is in the late spring of 1944. Okay, so we got to Birkenau, which was the reception camp for Auschwitz.
How long did it take? You said it was a longer trip. How
it
long
was
did
a
it
long
take?
trip. It took about 4 days. I don't have the exact time, but I know we had that.